The grand palace of Empress Sylith Vayne filled with celebration. The Nexari Empire had secured another territorial expansion, 3 more systems added to their vast holdings. Officers, nobles, and dignitaries toasted to Nexari's strength, to the Empress's tactical brilliance, to the glory of empire. Sylith moved through the crowd with regal composure, her distinctive pointed ears adorned with ceremonial jewelry, bearing that of someone born to command. She was intelligent, decisive, utterly certain that Nexari expansion brought order to chaotic regions. In her view, the Nexari way, structured, disciplined, technologically advanced, was superior. The wars weren't senseless violence. They were necessary steps toward galactic unification under enlightened rule. Among the attendees stood a human military observer, Sergeant Daniel Carter, present as treaty obligation between the Nexari Empire and Terran coalition. Daniel stood at the edge, expression carefully neutral, but his eyes told a different story. He was a veteran of conflicts in border regions where Nexari expansion had brushed against human space. He'd seen things that didn't make it into official reports or victory celebrations. Sylith noticed him, noticed his lack of enthusiasm, his isolation, the way he watched with something between sadness and disgust. She approached, partly from political obligation, partly from genuine curiosity. "Sergeant Carter," she greeted with formal courtesy, "you seem unimpressed by our victory. Does humanity not appreciate the value of bringing order to contested regions?" Daniel met her eyes directly, boldness that surprised her. "With respect, Your Imperial Majesty, I'm trying to appreciate the victory without thinking too much about the cost." Every victory has a cost. That's the nature of war. But long-term benefits outweigh temporary inconvenience. Temporary inconvenience. Daniel's voice was flat. "Is that what you call it?" Sylith's expression cooled. "If you have a concern, Sergeant, voice it plainly. I have no patience for passive-aggressive insinuation. My concern, Your Majesty, is that from up here in your palace, surrounded by officers and celebration, you're very far from the actual cost of your victories. And I don't think you've looked closely enough at what your necessary expansion leaves behind." The conversation was interrupted by other demands, but Daniel's words lingered. Over following days, Sylith found herself returning to Daniel's accusation. She summoned him for private meeting, framing it as diplomatic consultation. In her study, away from courtiers, she asked directly, "You suggested I'm ignorant of the cost of expansion. Explain specifically." Daniel was silent, debating how honest to be. Finally, "Your Majesty, 3 months ago, I was part of a humanitarian mission in the Corrales sector. That's a region you conquered 2 years ago. According to your reports, integration was successful, government transitioned smoothly, infrastructure improvements began immediately, civilian casualties were minimal and unavoidable." "That's correct. Corrales was one of our more efficient integrations. Your reports are missing some details." Daniel pulled up data on his tablet. Corrales had 4 billion people before conquest. Current population is 3.7 billion. That's 300 million unaccounted for. Sylith frowned. "Population estimates are imprecise. Migration, census methodology. I was there, Your Majesty. I saw refugee camps. Populations displaced by fighting who can't return home because their homes don't exist. Medical facilities overwhelmed with casualties, not from initial conquest, but from aftermath. Malnutrition because your administration disrupted food distribution. Disease because infrastructure was damaged and hasn't been repaired. And mass graves for people who didn't survive the minimal and unfortunate casualties." Sylith's expression hardened. "That's not possible. I receive regular reports from Corrales. Infrastructure repairs are ahead of schedule. If conditions were dire, I would know." "Would you? Or would your administrators tell you what you want to hear?" Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. "Your Majesty, you've built an empire on the assumption that Nexari rule is beneficial. That assumption shapes what information reaches you. Administrators who report problems are seen as incompetent, so everyone tells you what you want to hear. You're suggesting my government is lying to me. I'm suggesting that systems built on certainty filter out information that challenges that certainty. And maybe you've been so focused on expansion that you haven't looked at what happens after the victory celebrations end. Sylith wanted to dismiss this, but Daniel's demeanor, serious, sad, not attacking but genuinely trying to make her understand, made dismissal difficult. She made a surprising decision. Show me, take me to Corrales, show me what you claim I'm missing. Daniel looked startled. Your Majesty, you can't just. I'm Empress. I can do precisely as I choose. If you're correct, I need to see it. If you're wrong, you'll owe me an apology. She made arrangements personally, bypassing usual administrative channels, bringing only small security detail, insisting on unannounced arrival. No advance notice, no time for preparations. When they arrived at Corrales, Sylith insisted on seeing areas beyond administrative centers, refugee settlements, damaged districts, medical facilities Daniel mentioned. What she found shook her certainty to its core. The reality of Corrales was nothing like the reports. Administrative centers were functional, gleaming Nexari architecture, efficient bureaucracy. But beyond those centers, the facade collapsed. Refugee camps sprawled for kilometers, temporary shelters that had become permanent homes for millions displaced by conquest. Minimal infrastructure, inadequate sanitation, insufficient medical care. Daniel led Sylith through a medical facility operating beyond capacity. The director, a Nexari physician, was shocked by the unannounced visit but visibly relieved. Your Majesty, we've been sending requests for additional resources for 18 months. We're overwhelmed. Official reports say conditions are improving, but we're barely maintaining capacity. Sylith felt something cold forming. Your requests, who receives them? The regional administrator, Your Majesty, who assures us they're being forwarded for consideration. And how many have been approved? The doctor's expression was answer enough. 0. They visited a district damaged in fighting, buildings bearing scorch marks, infrastructure destroyed. Residents explained reconstruction had been deprioritized because it wasn't in administrative centers where inspectors would see it. An elderly Corralian woman approached Sylith directly. You're the Empress. When Sylith confirmed, the woman continued. My granddaughter died 4 months ago, treatable infection. The medical facility was overwhelmed and I couldn't afford private care under your new system. She was 6 years old. The woman's voice was factual, not accusatory, which somehow made it worse. Your officers told us conquest would bring better health care, maybe for people in administrative centers, not for us. Over next several days, Sylith insisted on seeing more other recently conquered systems. The pattern repeated. Administrative centers that looked successful, surrounding regions suffering from displacement, inadequate resources, systematic neglect. Her administrators had been reporting success by defining it narrowly, as efficient bureaucracy in areas that mattered for political purposes, while ignoring suffering in areas that didn't show up in official inspections. Finally, standing in another refugee camp, Sylith broke. How did I not know? How did I allow this? Because you built a system that told you what you wanted to hear, Daniel said gently. And because certainty is comfortable. Questioning your approach would mean admitting victories you're proud of came at costs you didn't account for. Sylith looked at the camp. I thought I was bringing order, stability, better governance. You probably were in some places. But you were also bringing this. Daniel gestured. The question is whether it's worth this cost and whether you're willing to actually see and address it instead of just celebrating victories. The journey back was silent. Sylith reviewed data, not official reports but raw data from medical facilities, refugee services, local populations. The true scope became clearer with each dataset. Back at the palace, she summoned her inner council. Daniel was present at her request. "I've returned from inspection tour," Sylith began. "What I found was systematic failure to accurately report conditions, widespread suffering we've been ignoring, and administrative priorities that favor appearance over actual well-being." The council reacted with surprise and defensiveness. One admiral protested, "Your Majesty, every conquest has transition difficulties. A 6-year-old dying from treatable infection is not normal. 300 million displaced people in permanent camps is not normal." She pulled up data. "Every recent conquest has similar patterns. We establish administrative centers that look successful and ignore everything beyond them." A regional administrator defended the approach. "Addressing every difficulty would slow expansion significantly. Is meaningless if we're creating instability faster than we can address it," Sylith interrupted. "What's the point of expanding if we're not improving conditions for populations we're bringing in?" Debate became heated. Finally, Sylith decided, "Effective immediately, we're implementing moratorium on new territorial expansion. All military resources will redirect to integration and infrastructure repair. Administrators will undergo review. Resources will be allocated based on actual need rather than political visibility." The council erupted in protests. Sylith spoke with absolute authority. "I am Empress. These decisions are final." She looked at Daniel. "Sergeant Carter, I'm requesting Terran Coalition provide advisors, people with humanitarian expertise who can help ensure our integration efforts actually benefit conquered populations. Will your government agree?" Daniel nodded. "I believe they'll agree." Over following months, Sylith threw herself into reform with the same determination she'd applied to expansion. It was difficult, frustrating, nothing like the clarity of conquest. But she persisted, driven by memory of that woman whose granddaughter died, of refugee camps, of suffering she'd been ignoring. Daniel remained as consultant, their relationship shifting from adversarial to collaborative. One evening, months later, they stood on a balcony overlooking the capital. "I was so certain," Sylith said quietly. "So convinced Nexari expansion was beneficial. That certainty made it easy to ignore contradictory evidence." "Certainty is comfortable," Daniel agreed, "but also dangerous, especially for people with power. You shattered my certainty. I was angry at first, but I'm grateful now. You did something difficult, challenged someone with power to destroy you because you believed truth mattered more than safety. That's courage." "I just showed you what was there," Daniel said. "You made the choice to look and do something. That's courage too." Sylith smiled slightly. "I'm still Empress, still believe in Nexari governance when implemented correctly. But I understand now that good intentions don't excuse bad outcomes, and leadership requires honestly confronting the cost of decisions." They stood in comfortable silence. Somewhere in the city, reforms were happening, slowly, imperfectly, but happening. The story ends with Sylith preparing a different kind of public address. Not a victory celebration, but direct communication to conquered populations acknowledging failures, suffering ignored, reforms being implemented. It was politically risky, admitting error, showing vulnerability. But it was honest. Daniel stood nearby as she prepared, no longer critic but trusted advisor. The alien queen ignored the scars of war until a human soldier shattered her certainty. And from that shattered certainty, she built something better. Leadership grounded in truth rather than comfortable assumptions, expansion tempered by integration, power balanced by acknowledgement of cost. It wasn't the empire she'd imagined building, but it was an empire actually worth building.